We have with us today Dr. Purnima Menon as our keynote speaker for the inaugural edition of the Malavika Memorial Lecture Series. Let me introduce Dr. Menon to our audience here. Dr. Purnima Menon is a Senior Director, Food and Nutrition Policy at the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, and is based in New Delhi. She is also the Senior Research Fellow at Poverty, Health and Nutrition Division and South Asia Office, IFPRI. In her work in India, Dr. Menon directs POSHAN, which stands for Partnerships and Opportunities to Strengthen and Harmonize Actions for Nutrition in India. POSHAN is an initiative to support more use of evidence for nutrition in India. She conducts implementation research on scaling up maternal and child nutrition interventions, including on evaluating large-scale behavior change communications programs in nutrition and health. Dr. Menon has research experience in India, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Haiti, Vietnam, and Nepal, and has published extensively and invests deeply in research translation in her engagements with policy communities. In addition to her research, Dr. Menon co-convenes a global nutrition policy course with the Institute for Development Studies in the United Kingdom. She has designed and taught many adaptations of this course in India as well. The title of her talk today is Research and Public Policy Intersections in the Context of Nutrition in India. In this talk, Dr. Menon will speak about generating evidence to help shape and support public policy on nutrition in India. She will also highlight key contributions of Dr. Malavika Subramanyam and reflect on the role of scientists in supporting policies and programs with high-quality evidence. The talk will be followed by a question and answer round. May I now request Dr. Purnima Menon to kindly join us. A huge round of applause for Dr. Purnima Menon. Dr. Menon, please.
Thank you so much. I should confess I had prepared a few sort of opening introductory remarks, and I've lost all of it. But how could I not? It has been the most moving last 45 minutes, I think, that I have had in a long time, celebrating Malavika's life, getting to meet her parents, her students, and to be here with all of you today. I regret not getting to know her personally, because clearly we shared a love for dancing, which is not on my bio and clearly should be. So the next time, people know that we can celebrate life in so many different ways. But let me, of course, I dedicate the talk to her. I'm incredibly grateful to have been chosen by all of you to be here today. When we do science, we give a lot of talks. I do this a lot. You don't really ever think that you will end up giving a talk to celebrate the life of another scientist who went before their time. And so I'm deeply, deeply honored to be here with you all today. I want to thank you, Deepak, for the invitation. I want to thank the Subramanyans, Mala's parents, for your kindness today, your strength and your fortitude in what can only be an incredibly difficult time. I'm a mother. I'm also a daughter. And it's really meaningful to be here with you today to talk about the millions of other children who live in India, whose lives I think we all want to improve. I don't know that I can do justice to anything that has come before this. And I ask for your patience to bear with me in what I hope will not be a dry lecture, but instead I hope will be the celebration of science, a celebration of research. I really appreciated, sir, what you said, that it is our job to celebrate the best of humanity. And I think there is a lot to celebrate in the practice of science and in the art of taking science to make people's lives better. And I think a lot of the science, most of the science that Malavika did, all of the science that Malavika did, because it was grounded in society, it was grounded in understanding the world in which people live. I think it was clearly science that was dedicated to the idea of making people's lives better. I find great kinship with her in that brand of science. Similar things motivated me. I wasn't motivated to become a doctor, but I loved food as a child. I read recipe books from the day I was, as long as I can remember. And I studied nutrition to maybe become a chef. I still enjoy cooking. But through that journey, I discovered that a lot of people actually didn't have, well, firstly, I discovered that there was a lot of science in nutrition. There was biochemistry, there was microbiology, there was anatomy, there was physiology, and it was all very fascinating. But I think for me, the most influential moments were when I realized that many, many inequities in our society meant that most people in today's world don't get the food that they should get, don't get to live the lives that they should get, or that they should be able to live. And I realized that we have some power as scientists to do something about that by telling those stories, by showing that data, by bringing the tools that we have to tell, stories about things that other people that the people themselves may not have the power to tell. So what I'd like to do in my talk is to tell some of those stories, and I'll intersect them with the contributions that Malavika's work has made to honing our understanding of nutrition, especially child nutrition in India, to supporting the world of public policy with science. I hope to inspire some budding scientists in the room, although I think you needed no inspiration more than what we have already heard about Mala today. And I'd be more than happy to interact with some of you looking forward. I didn't bring my timer, so I'm going to ask maybe if somebody could give me a time check at about 20 minutes so that I don't take too long. Let me start not with science, but with public policy and say that moving an agenda, moving an entire country sometimes to pay attention to a particular issue and to work on that issue in public policy is complex. Doing the science that connects that is also complex. What does it take? It takes many, many, many people in our society, politicians, bureaucrats, the media, all of society to recognize that we have a problem. It takes those same people and maybe more to agree that, we understand what causes that problem and that we can agree on some solutions to that problem. It then takes a whole lot more people to agree on policy instruments, to put the money towards them, to invest in those programs, and then to continue to learn about them. Through these long processes, and in my world now, in returning, I came back to India from the US in 2008. One also realizes over time as a scientist, because we stay in our world, that the evolution of science and evidence also has to move along with the evolution of politics, finance, policy, society, and more. And that really our journey in a sense of bringing, let's see how we can do this. Here. Okay, good, I'll use this mouse. That our journey of taking science to policy and even the movement of public policy itself is quite a bit like snakes and ladders. And at the end of the day, what we want to do as scientists is to help people climb the ladders, to try and make sure that there aren't too many big snakes in the way, so that as we move, society improves slowly but surely. And I think we've learned a lot about how to do this through examples such as the work that Malavika and I and others have done on nutrition. Now, I want to say a little bit about the program of work that I manage at IFPRI, because it's the program of work through which I have encountered many, many scientists across India, including people like Malavika. So our program is called POSHAN. This is very different from the government's own national nutrition program, which is called POSHAN Abhiyan. I have to confess, I was quite surprised when when it was unveiled. I don't claim any influence on that, of course. But we were given the task in 2011 when our program of work started to say, you need to pull together science and evidence in ways that support the movement of public policy for nutrition in India. It wasn't a small ask. And so we set about between 2011 and 12, really trying to understand what was going on around that issue. We did policy reviews. We tried to, so we write about here in the time frame. looked at the literature, looked at the evidence, talked to many people, and started to think about, well, what does it mean to do research and to connect research to people in this context? We then began a series of work, and a lot of it was focused on childhood undernutrition and childhood stunting, which Malavika had also worked on. And we're now here, we've been through 2 phases of this work. We continue to work with many different partners. We connect scientists through conferences. We meet scientists in critical policy spaces. And that's how I got to meet Malavika in 2 or 3 different places at 3IE, where she was doing some work to design an evaluation of the Gram Varta program, and at Niti Aayog, where she was supporting quite a lot of work. I think it was in the 17, 18, 19 timeframe. I think, Mala, we also met there, where they were doing an evaluation of the ICDS. The kinds of evidence that we as scientists bring together to support the policy community. So this is the kind of work that I do and my team does at IFPRI. And it's also turned out because I spent a lot of time trying to understand Malavika's work and preparing for this talk and listening to her and reading her papers. But this is the kind of work, firstly, helping people understand the problem. So research on the different types of malnutrition and their determinants, helping people understand what was going on with the solutions that we have. We've done some of that work, and she's also, of course, done quite a lot of work. And then on my team, we've also done some work on success stories in tackling malnutrition, because, at some level, quite frankly, we have had enough of hearing about the problem, and we really want to hear about successes from within India. Now, in the work that we do, which is, again, how I really got to know people like Malavika, is we recognize that it isn't just one single individual in any place who really makes change happen. Change happens through many, many, many different people coming together to align around recognizing that something is a problem. When I started work on childhood malnutrition in India in 2008, the discourse was nothing like it is today. The science and the kinds of papers that we see are nothing like we have today. And in a sense, what we have today is a proliferation of scientists of all disciplines across India who have decided that this is a problem that is grand enough that it deserves attention from everyone, whether you're someone who studies the biochemistry and the molecular biology of what happens in cells that don't get enough nutrition, to people who study what happens in moving policy machines. And Malavika's work was somewhere in the middle of that grand spectrum, just like mine, on social epidemiology and on understanding what happens in public policy. So in our world, we connect, and we try to connect people who do science and people who do policy and bring things together. And this is the context in which I also had the privilege to get to know her. In our work, we also do a lot of work on communications and connecting people around data and evidence, and again, created many opportunities to get to know her, particularly in our work on directly engaging with with policy counterparts making big decisions, such as those at Niti Aayog. Now, I want to say a little bit about why I care about malnutrition, partly because I think these are the same kinds of things that inspire people like Malavika, and I hope inspire many other people to focus on this as a particular topic. Over time, the research that many, many people have done has helped us understand that most children in India die because they're malnourished. 70% almost of India's babies who die today, many hundreds of thousands of them, die because they're malnourished. They don't die just because they had an infectious disease. They don't die just because they got sick. They die because that sickness or that infectious disease comes on top of malnutrition. Malnutrition is by far the biggest driver of non-communicable diseases. India is the diabetes capital of the world. We have large numbers of people with hypertension and with heart disease. All of these are underpinned by malnutrition, including in the early years. Malnutrition contributes to cognitive impairments, and we understand that there are intergenerational impacts of poor nutrition. And last but not least, we understand that there are linkages between being malnourished early in life and losses both to individuals and to society. This is what inspired me to work on malnutrition. I have no doubt that it is among the many things that inspired someone like Malavika to work on the same topic. We also have understood over time that there is no single malnutrition challenge. Malnutrition exists everywhere. It exists around us. It maybe even exists among some of us in this room. It manifests in many different ways. It manifests as stunting among children, the map on your left, highly concentrated in northern districts across India, but also in several parts of southern states. It manifests as anemia among women and the broader population, and it also manifests as overweight or obesity among both men and women. So you can choose to work on malnutrition and be inspired to work on it, regardless of which way you choose to look at it. In the work that I'll speak about today, it really is more focused on childhood stunting. So where we are in India, taking those 4 things that I had mentioned earlier in terms of recognizing that we have a problem, agreeing on its drivers, agreeing on policy instruments, and then investing and looking ahead, is the journey that I want to tell you a little bit about. So the process of recognizing that India has a malnutrition challenge, measured in this case by childhood stunting, was a journey that took almost 5 years. So when the 2007 NFHS data came out, there was a lot of problem denial in the initial years around childhood stunting. There were people who said, well, no, India's children grow differently. We must apply different growth standards to Indian children. There was confusion around what did stunting mean, whether it's a complex biological process or a statistical indicator. Do we use it to measure individuals or measure populations? And what is the job of scientists in this situation? Our job is to help cut through that clutter, to do the research that helps people understand that this problem is still a problem, that it is an undeniable problem, that it is a problem that is worthy of our attention as a society. I'll share some of Malavika's papers that made critical contributions to this in those years. So this is almost, I would say, between 2007-8 and 2012-13, we were still debating whether stunting was a problem, okay? After that, there was work to decide, well, what causes this? What is the problem here? Is it sanitation? Is it gender? Is it multisectoral? What are the solutions that must be in place to tackle this problem? Here again, her work has had a profound impact. There are some key papers that have come from her work that have contributed to that. And then we get to the point of, well, are we going to do something about it, and what are we going to do about it? And there you look at policy instruments and where India has been. A lot of our work on tackling malnutrition has been in the ICDS. Food and feeding, and the food and feeding bias, I would call it, has remained strong. Understanding the quality, the reach, and the equity of the ICDS program has been a big part of research that needed to be done again here. Some of Malavika's work has been critical there. Today in India, we are in a new solution space. There is a lot of discussion about behavior change. I recall that she mentioned that in her interests as well, about the need for multisectorality. But unfortunately, some of the things that she, I think, was most passionate about is the recognition of the importance of social determinants. And we are still lagging on that. We're especially lagging on actions to tackle the social determinants. And last but not least, of course, we need a lot of work to do on still. It's interesting to me that in some ways we're almost back to the problem recognition cycle, because again, now in the news, and some of you maybe, it's remarkable to me. I saw a piece by Chetan Bhagat, of all people, the other day, who decided he had the qualifications to speak about, India's growth standards. So this is where we have reached in the nutrition discourse in India. As you can see, it's a bit of a cycle. There's a lot of clutter, and our job as scientists is to continue to help to cut through that clutter. Now, I want to speak a little bit about the problem recognition piece, because this is a big one. As I mentioned, it took almost 5 years from 2008 when it was accepted, broadly as a shame and as a curse by the then Prime Minister, to several years of work where people tried to deny the growth standards. There was then a 6-paper series in the Economic and Political Weekly, which maybe we need to resurrect 10 years later, that basically reminded people that it didn't matter whether you looked at the problem as a nutritionist, an activist, a public health professional. You'll recognize many names of the authors who wrote about this in that EPW piece. Stunting was still a challenge for India's children, and something that India's children actually deserved to have better recognition of more than anything else. Now, in understanding the drivers of stunting, Malavika's work played quite an important role, because she was one of the few people together with work that I had done, that really forced people to recognize that the underpinnings of childhood stunting in India are complex, that they are grounded in social determinants, and that we shouldn't try to seek a single magic bullet or a single magic reason for it. The fault was really in the many things that were not going on. So I want to point out a couple of papers of hers in the course of this. The first is this paper, which in 2011, in that period when there was a lot of contestation, really spoke to the issue and the linkages of the connections between economic growth and childhood undernutrition. In this work that she did together with her mentors, and I want you to mark this point. This is work that she did with her mentors. You'll see later in my talk that some of the more critical contributions later have come from work that her students did with her as a mentor, which speaks a lot to her own sort of professional journey. But this paper made important contributions to shaping our understanding about the determinants and really made the case for focused interventions and strategies. It was one of many papers that, in a sense, forced the development of a multi-sectoral strategy to tackle childhood undernutrition, the Nourishing India strategy. She also brought to her work and to our understanding as a broader policy and research community, work that really highlighted the importance of looking at social inequalities in the context of undernutrition. So again, this piece of work done together with her mentors was grounded in the frame of social epidemiology. And what it did was highlight the importance of examining disparities and examining trends in those disparities. It isn't enough that we say some people are not doing well enough. What we need to see in countries is that disparities begin to close. That's when we know that we have changed the conditions in which children grow over time. So in her work, which tracked data until about 2007, she showed that in fact the disparities had not gone away even over that period. What we are now able to see looking at data since 2007, really since the advent of a range of different policies by the government of India then that aim to tackle a range of different social inequalities in access to health through the National Rural Health Mission, in improvements in poverty, through the scaling up of many social welfare programs, et cetera, is that today we're beginning to see those disparities close. Now we move to looking at some actions. And what's interesting, of course, in the context of India's landscape, and I realize this is a complicated slide, but the key message is all that matters, which is that when we look at the science of how to tackle nutrition, this figure is from, and those interventions on the side of direct health interventions, indirect health interventions, other sectoral strategies that directly affect nutrition, and sectoral strategies that indirectly affect nutrition. Of course, India's policy landscape is quite replete with these policies. Our challenges are in understanding how these policies and programs reach people. Again, lenses of social epidemiology and equity are critical to bring here. And she did that in her work on the ICDS, is to understand now. And scientists have a big role to play in understanding how public policy solutions actually reach people. Social scientists have a big role to play. Epidemiologists have a big role to play there. And I think she did that in ways that were really exemplary. She was a key contributor to work on POSHAN Abhiyan. I know she spent a lot of time working with Niti Aayog. In our work that we've done together with Niti Aayog, we found that a lot of things were moving on the policy front. They reminded us how complex it is, even once program proclamations are made, to actually move the policy machinery to deliver on those programs. Mala's work on the ICDS and various aspects of it have made critical contributions to scientific understanding and to people supporting policy around different aspects of this program. So she has a key paper on the reach and utilization of the program. I know she's done research on the quality of take-home rations, and I know she, William Joe, and Mala and others have also done a really big study on the governance and implementation of the ICDS. These are examples of how science can connect with policy. And I think for the scientists in the room or the scientists who are listening to this talk elsewhere, this is something that we must and we can remember, that we have a great deal of power as scientists to shape what happens in our context and in countries we care about by doing science on what happens in public policy, by looking at who benefits, who's left out, by bringing our training, by bringing our lenses and our ways of doing science to it. And I think she brought a very strong social epidemiology lens to doing that science. I'm going to skip that. I want to again reflect on the lenses that Mala brings to her work, or brought to her work in thinking and helping people think about the importance of society and social inequalities in how life works. And I think it takes that kind of work to really remind us that the malnutrition challenge that India faces will take much more than a nutrition program like the ICDS to solve. It will take many people, many scientists, many policymakers, many program implementers to stay together around a multifaceted agenda for change. We need change to happen, and we need science on food systems. We need change and science on social systems and economic systems and health systems. And it really, nutrition to me is a great reminder that many people can come together to look at a problem in many different ways and contribute their great science to help society make change. We have really no time to lose. India's progress on the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030 will actually be captured on children born starting in 2025. So in about 2029, all countries are going to do these surveys that look at what happened to the children who were born in the 5 years as we led up to the SDGs. Those surveys in 2029 will capture those children who were born in 2025. What does that mean for what we do today? It means that what we do today must focus on what is going on with the lives of adolescents and people, young people in society today. Here again, I think Mala was ahead of her time because she did a lovely paper on looking at what was happening within homes and what would be happening in the homes of those children who are going to be born in 2025. Her very recent paper, and this paper for me is an example of her mentorship. Unlike the other paper that I showed earlier, which was an example of her being mentored by some of her mentors at Harvard, this is a piece of work where her mentorship shines. It's one of the first papers, I think, to examine intra-household attitudes, what happens within families and their relationship to childhood undernutrition. It reminds us that a critical pathway to changing what happens to children is changing what happens in their families. And that to change that, we have to reshape what happens in terms of how mothers and fathers come together to support their children. She also recognized that it was really important that we focus in on understanding what was happening with adolescents. This is what I meant when I said what happens to India, what we see in terms of India's progress on SDGs for children born in 2025 is going to be completely dependent on what is happening with adolescents today, in 2024 and in 2025 and beyond. And her research on highlighting the role of societal context, and by using a very interesting metric, the average education levels of older women in any community, is just a very clever way of reminding us that that societal context in which young girls and young boys today grow is going to determine, in a sense, their future and the future of this country. So as I said, I think she was a little ahead of her time there. So where I stand in terms of childhood undernutrition, childhood stunting, and our intersections and our role as scientists is that we still have a long road ahead and strong roles to play. This is an issue that is still standing. I want to remind us again that a lot of these things that we're working on, especially insights on what needs to happen on social determinants, and now in my world, certainly, some of the work that we've been doing on studying successes in the context of India are still not embedded in the strategy. I want to remind us again of the role of social determinants by sharing with you the last piece of research now from my research team on looking at how stunting has changed in states that were successful at reducing stunting in India. We studied 4 states, including the state that we stand in today. We studied Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, Orissa, and Tamil Nadu. And across all 4 of those states, we found that the conditions in which people live, the social conditions of people's lives, not just the health and nutrition programs that the government decides to deliver, contribute tremendously to how stunting has improved over time. We found that, of course, policies will evolve. The ICDS program that we talk about a lot is just one of the many things that has needed to change to actually contribute to changes in stunting, and that the states that were successful have always added to national efforts by going local, by drawing on the best of their understanding of local challenges, and by addressing social issues in a local context. A vision to address an outcome at a political level, but across society in these states was important. Capable and stable bureaucrats who were given space and time to implement programs was important. Politicians who put money towards programs were important. And catalysts and champions of all kinds, including scientists, have played a critical role there. More recently on our research team, we've studied the state of Bihar. I don't know if there's, if there are people here from Bihar in this room, but I think if you hear the word Bihar in India, you're not used to hearing about it as a success case. Well, we have new research now that shows that because of the work that many, many people have been done, informed by science, stunting has reduced at a faster between 2016 and 2020 compared to what happened before that. Again, our study of what contributed to those successes reminds us of the importance of social determinants. We found that sanitation, women's education, socioeconomic well-being are some of the most important contributors to reducing child malnutrition. Again, I want to remind you that these are some of the things that Mala has spent her life reminding us about, the importance of social determinants. Our challenge now is to connect these things with our political leadership, to get people to acknowledge that it is not enough to simply deliver a program like the ICDS, that if we want to solve malnutrition in this country, we need to really invest in improving many, many facets of people's lives. I'm going to skip that as well. I want to close by talking about science and the role that scientists who care about supporting public policy can play. And I hope that this inspires and helps us sort of remember Mala, because I think she was one of those scientists who cared to use her science, her art, her craft to support the kind of work that makes other people's lives better. So what can we do as scientists who care about supporting public policy? Firstly, we have to stay true to the science. Zero compromise on science. And I think for me, that is very, very, very clear when I see the kind of science that Mala did. She published her science in peer-reviewed papers. This is what every scientist must do. We have to get our science out, not be afraid of what people will think about the results. Because sometimes the results of the science we do is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for society, it's uncomfortable for politics. But the most important thing that we can do as scientists is stay true to the science, stay grounded in the science and in data and evidence. At the same time, we have to embrace complexity. We have to recognize that science itself is complex, but also that scientists are complex. We have to all work with scientists from many different fields to be able to move a field. The world of nutrition today has moved in India because scientists from across the world, epidemiologists like Mala, economists in other places, people who study nutrition from a biological perspective, people who do implementation research on programs, have all been able to somehow come together to connect all of our science to help understand a problem that is so important for our society. I think scientists have to be available to other people. We have to be proactive to connect our science to other policies. We have to connect and bring others in. We have to not be shy. Sometimes, and I know all of us as scientists, and Mala and I have also talked about this before, when we take our science to settings of public policy, it is not always a comfortable space for us as scientists, because that world is very different from our world as scientists. The way science is communicated, the way science is interpreted in public policy settings is very different from how we may do it in a room like this. And I think Mala was open to that. She was ready for that. So she was a scientist who was willing and able to bring her science and her methods to places which are even uncomfortable for us sometimes as scientists. We have to recognize our limited power as scientists, but also we can never give up. Her quest was to get people to pay attention to social determinants. And I think she was remarkably successful in doing that. We have to invest in teaching, but also we have to invest in learning. And I think from everything that I have heard and seen so far, there was no question about the fact that as a scientist, she was a lifelong learner. I have a lot of things for what policymakers can do about science as well, but this is not an audience of policymakers. But I think that what we want is for them to stay informed and for them to value and listen to scientists. One of the things that I have realized over the many years is that scientists stay, we just keep doing our research on the same kinds of things, sometimes different things, but we are really a permanent fixture in many parts of society. The knowledge community is a permanent fixture. We teach, we do research. We don't change our professions that quickly because we love what we do. Politicians may change, people in bureaucracies may change, people in agencies may change, but in fact, scientists kind of we're stick with it kind of people, and we have to use that power. We have to use the power, the fact that we stay with our problems, we continue to study them, we dissect them one way and then we dissect them the other, we go against our own findings, and we're not afraid to do that. But that's a bit of power that scientists have actually to help public policy. And I hope that many of us in this room who are scientists will continue to do that. So I want to end in closing with a tribute to Malavika, who, as I mentioned, I really regret not knowing her as a person, because truly I know that we would have enjoyed dancing together among many other things. My meetings and interactions with her were almost always around some kind of a scientific table. But in tribute to her, I just want to say that, her growth as a scientist and a professional and a teacher is there for us to see in her work. The legacy that scientists leave behind, both in the papers they publish, but also especially in the people that they engage with, is really the true testament. That is our legacy. And in her work, what I have seen is, her development in terms of developing methodological work with her mentors, to shaping and deepening the research in the context upon her return to India. And finally, to her contributions to training and working with younger scientists as a mentor. She had many more years to give to her students, to her community, and to her country, of course. And I think the best that any and all of us can do is to carry forward her legacy by investing in science for social progress. Doing that requires us to be really true to the quest of science, to the scientific method, to the purity of data, and to reducing bias in how we do research, communicate research, and use science. What she seems to clearly have taught us is that we also have to dance along that way. I want to thank you again for having me here today. It has been probably one of the greatest privileges in my professional career to be able to stand here in front of her parents, in front of the two of you, and her students and her mentors, and to offer these words as a token of my appreciation as someone who knew her from her work and was not privileged to know her as much as a person, to celebrate her life and her legacy. Thank you so much again. Oh, I can take this. Yeah.